You'd think after 35 years of marriage and raising 3 successful children, I'd earned the right to dress however I pleased in my own home. Apparently, my daughter-in-law Madison had other ideas. What started as snide comments about my outdated wardrobe escalated into a full-blown family intervention about how I was supposedly embarrassing everyone. But Madison made one crucial mistake. She forgot that the woman she was trying to shame owned the house she was living in rent-free. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Anna Richardson, and at 63, I thought I'd seen every flavor of family drama imaginable. I was wrong. It all began on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in October when I was puttering around my kitchen in my favorite pair of well-worn jeans and an old college sweater that had seen better decades. The sweater was soft as butter, faded to a gentle periwinkle blue, and had a small hole near the left elbow that I'd been meaning to mend for about 5 years, but never quite got around to. I was making my morning coffee when Madison swept into the kitchen like she owned the place, which technically she didn't, though you wouldn't know it from her attitude. She was dressed in what I can only describe as her usual armor, a crisp white blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, tailored black slacks that looked like they'd been pressed by professionals, and those ridiculous pointed toe heels that clicked against my hardwood floors like tiny hammers. "Good morning, Anna," she said, though her tone suggested it was anything but good. Madison had this way of saying my name that made it sound like she was announcing the arrival of an unwelcome guest at a fancy party. She'd been living in my house for 8 months now, ever since she and my son Derek had hit what they called temporary financial difficulties. Temporary, it seemed, was a very flexible concept in Madison's vocabulary. I turned to greet her with a smile, genuinely happy to see her despite everything. That's the thing about me. I'm an optimist by nature, always hoping that today might be the day we finally connect as a family should. "Morning, sweetheart. Coffee's fresh if you want some." Madison's eyes did that thing they always did. A quick, almost imperceptible scan from head to toe that somehow managed to catalog every perceived flaw in my appearance within seconds. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together in what I'd learned to recognize as her signature expression of barely concealed disapproval. "Anna, we need to talk." She pulled out one of my kitchen chairs and sat down with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for soap opera actresses delivering devastating news. It's about your presentation." I blinked, setting down my coffee mug a little harder than necessary. "My presentation?" "Your appearance, your clothes, the way you present yourself to the world." Madison's manicured fingers drummed against my kitchen table as she spoke, each tap punctuating her words like tiny exclamation points of judgment. I looked down at myself, confused. Sure, my jeans had seen better days, and yes, the sweater was old enough to vote, but I was clean, covered, and comfortable. I wasn't planning to meet the Queen of England over my morning coffee. I was just existing in my own kitchen, in my own house, on my own time. "I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, Madison." She sighed, the kind of theatrical sigh that suggested she was bearing the weight of the world's problems on her narrow shoulders. "Look, I know you've been through a lot since Harold passed. Grief affects people differently, and sometimes we let things slide that we normally wouldn't. My husband Harold had died 2 years ago after a brief but brutal battle with cancer." The mention of his name in this context made something cold and sharp twist in my chest. Whatever Madison was building up to, dragging Harold's memory into it felt like a line crossed. "Madison, I'm going to need you to get to the point. The point is that you're embarrassing the family." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for months and they'd finally burst through the dam of social propriety. "Derek's up for a promotion at the firm, and appearances matter. When we go out together, when people see us as a family unit, Your choices reflect on all of us. I stared at her, coffee growing cold in my hands. My choices? Your clothes, Anna. You dress like someone who's given up. Those ratty old jeans, the ancient sweaters, the complete lack of makeup or any effort at all. It's not just about you anymore. Derek has colleagues, important clients. We get invited to events, and when you show up looking like you've just rolled out of bed, it reflects poorly on his professional image. The kitchen fell silent, except for the steady tick of the wall clock that Harold had hung 23 years ago. I could feel something building inside me, a slow burn that started in my stomach and began working its way up toward my throat. Are you telling me that my clothes are somehow preventing Derek from getting promoted? Madison's face flushed slightly, but she pressed on. I'm saying that in Derek's world, image matters. Perception is reality. And right now, the perception is that he comes from a family that doesn't care about standards or presentation. I set my coffee mug down very carefully, buying myself time to process what was happening. Madison was sitting in my kitchen, eating food I'd bought with my money, living under a roof I'd provided for free, and telling me that my clothes were somehow a threat to my son's career. The audacity was breathtaking. Madison? Derek is 34 years old. He's been working at that law firm for 6 years. If his career success hinges on whether his mother wears designer clothes to family dinners, then perhaps he's chosen the wrong profession. You're missing the point. Madison's voice rose slightly, and I could see her struggling to maintain her composure. This isn't about Derek's competence. It's about the complete picture. Successful people surround themselves with other successful people. They present a certain image to the world. And what image am I presenting exactly? That you've given up, that you don't care about yourself or your family enough to make an effort, that you're content to just exist without any pride in your appearance. The words hit harder than I'd expected. Not because they were true, but because they revealed something about Madison that I'd been trying not to see for months. This wasn't a concern disguised as criticism. This was pure, undiluted judgment, wrapped in a thin veneer of family loyalty. Stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting still for too long. At 63, I'd earned every creak and pop, every gray hair and laugh line. I'd raised 3 children, buried my parents and my husband, survived a bout with breast cancer in my 50s, and built a life that had meaning and purpose. But apparently, none of that mattered if I couldn't meet Madison's standards for appropriate family attire. Madison, I think we need to establish some boundaries here. Her eyes narrowed. Boundaries? You're living in my house, eating my food, using my electricity and water, all free of charge. I've been happy to help you and Derek get back on your feet. But I won't be lectured about my appearance by someone who's benefiting from my generosity. Madison's face went white, then red, then settled somewhere in between. I'm not lecturing you. I'm trying to help you understand how your choices affect the people who love you. The people who love me would love me whether I wore designer clothes or burlap sacks. They certainly wouldn't make my clothing choices about their own insecurity and social climbing. Social climbing? Madison's voice went up an octave. This isn't about social climbing. This is about basic respect for yourself, for your family, for the memory of your husband. And there it was again. Harold's memory being weaponized to make me feel ashamed of my perfectly reasonable choices. The cold, sharp thing in my chest grew teeth. Don't you dare. Use my husband's memory to shame me about my clothes. Harold loved me in everything from evening gowns to pajamas covered in coffee stains. He never once suggested that my appearance was embarrassing or inadequate. Madison stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you needed someone to tell you the truth instead of just enabling your decline. The word decline hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had just been lit. I could see Madison realize she'd gone too far. but the damage was done. She'd just accused my late husband of enabling my supposed deterioration and suggested that I was somehow less than I used to be. Get out of my kitchen. Anna, I didn't mean, get out of my kitchen, Madison. We're done with this conversation. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I held up my hand. We're done. Madison gathered her dignity around herself like a cloak and swept out of the kitchen with the same dramatic flair she'd entered with. I listened to her heels click-clacking up the stairs to the guest bedroom she shared with Derek. And then I sat back down at my table with my cold coffee and tried to process what had just happened. My daughter-in-law had just told me that my clothes were embarrassing the family, that my casual, comfortable attire was somehow threatening my son's career prospects, that I needed to change my appearance to meet her standards for appropriate family presentation. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just angry, furious. I'd been widowed, not lobotomized. I'd been grieving, not decomposing. I was living my life on my own terms, in my own house, and apparently that was unacceptable to Madison's vision of how a proper family should look. Thought about Derek, my middle child, who'd always been the most ambitious of my 3 kids. He was smart, driven, and genuinely good at his job as a corporate attorney. But he'd also inherited his father's tendency to avoid conflict at all costs, which meant he often stayed silent when he should have spoken up. I wondered if he knew about Madison's little intervention this morning, or if this was her solo mission to reform his embarrassing mother. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my eldest daughter, Jennifer, who lived about an hour away with her husband and 2 teenage boys. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Hey, Mom, want to grab lunch tomorrow? I have some news to share. Stared at the message, imagining Madison's reaction if Jennifer and I went somewhere nice, and I showed up in my usual jeans and sweater. Would Madison be there, mentally cataloging my failures as a presentable family member? Would she corner Jennifer later with concerns about my decline? The thought made me even angrier. Madison had been in my life for less than 3 years, but she felt entitled to police my appearance and judge my choices. She'd moved into my house when she needed help, accepted my generosity without question, and then decided that I wasn't meeting her standards for what a proper mother-in-law should look like. I finished my cold coffee and made a decision. If Madison wanted to make my clothes a family issue, then we were going to make it a family issue, but not in the way she expected. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and opened my closet. In the very back, behind the comfortable jeans and soft sweaters that made up my daily uniform, hung a collection of clothes I hadn't touched in 2 years. These were the outfits I'd worn to charity galas with Harold, the dresses I'd bought for special occasions, the designer pieces I'd accumulated over decades of being married to a successful businessman. Harold had always insisted that I deserved nice things. He'd bought me jewelry for anniversaries, encouraged me to shop at the better stores, and made sure I felt beautiful and valued. After he died, I'd packed most of it away. Not because I was declining or giving up, but because wearing fancy clothes to sit alone in my house felt pointless. But maybe it was time to remind everyone, especially Madison, exactly who they were dealing with. I pulled out a black cashmere dress that still had the tags on it. I'd bought it for a Christmas party that Harold never got to attend, and I'd never had the heart to wear it without him. Next to it hung a navy blazer that had cost more than most people spent on rent, and below that sat a pair of Italian leather shoes that Harold had bought me for my 60th birthday. In my jewelry box, wrapped in soft cloth, lay the diamond necklace Harold had given me for our 25th anniversary. It wasn't enormous or flashy, but it was real, and it was beautiful, and it had been chosen with love by a man who thought I deserved diamonds. I held the necklace up to the light, watching. It catch the morning sun streaming through my bedroom window. Madison wanted to talk about the presentation, about image and standards and what successful families look like. I was about to give her a masterclass. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I made an appointment at Celestine's Salon, the upscale place downtown where I used to get my hair done for special occasions. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Taylor, sounded surprised to hear from me. "Mrs. Richardson, it's been so long. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing well, Taylor. I need the works. Cut, color, style, maybe a manicure too." "What's your earliest opening?" "Well, we're pretty booked, but let me see. I could squeeze you in tomorrow at 10 if you don't mind staying most of the day." "Perfect. I'll take it." After hanging up, I called my financial advisor, Robert Chen, whom Harold and I had worked with for 15 years. Robert had helped me navigate the complexities of Harold's estate and had been checking in regularly to make sure I was managing everything properly. "Anna, good to hear from you. How can I help?" "Robert, I need to understand something about the property. The house. If I wanted to make changes to the living arrangements, what would that look like legally?" There was a pause. "Are you thinking of selling?" "No, not selling. But I have some family members staying with me temporarily, and I want to make sure I understand my options if that arrangement needs to change." "Ah, I see. Well, since you own the property outright and they're not paying rent, they'd be considered guests rather than tenants. You'd have the right to ask them to leave with reasonable notice, typically 30 days. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Robert. I'm just making sure I understand my position." We talked for a few more minutes about other matters, and then I hung up feeling more informed and, strangely, more powerful. Knowledge, Harold used to say, was the best foundation for any decision. That evening, Derek came home from work looking tired and stressed. He worked long hours at the firm, often coming home well after 8 o'clock with his tie loosened and his usually perfect hair slightly mussed. He was a good son, hardworking and ambitious, but somewhere along the way he'd started letting Madison make decisions for both of them. "Hey, Mom," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door and loosening his tie the rest of the way. "How was your day?" "Interesting," I replied, not looking up from the book I was reading in the living room. "Your wife and I had quite a conversation this morning." Derek froze halfway through taking off his jacket. "Oh?" "She's concerned about my wardrobe. Apparently my clothes are embarrassing the family and might hurt your career prospects." I watched Derek's face cycle through several expressions: surprise, embarrassment, anger, and finally resignation. He sank into Harold's old chair, which I'd never moved or changed, and rubbed his forehead with both hands. "Mom, I'm sorry. Madison sometimes, she gets ideas about how things should be. Ideas about how I should dress? She grew up differently than we did. Her family was very focused on appearances, on what other people thought. Her mother used to critique everything: her clothes, her hair, her posture. I think she doesn't realize how it sounds when she does the same thing." I closed my book and looked at my son, really looked at him. Derek had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who tried to smooth over conflicts and make everyone happy. But in trying to keep the peace between his wife and his mother, he was failing both of us. "Derek, do you think my clothes are embarrassing?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with competing loyalties. Finally, he met my eyes. "No, Mom. I think you look fine. You look like yourself, which is all I've ever wanted." "Then why didn't you tell Madison that when she brought up her concerns with you?" Derek's silence was answer enough. Madison hadn't just confronted me on her own. She'd discussed it with Derek first, and he hadn't shut it down. He'd let his wife believe that her criticism of his mother was justified, or at least tolerable. "Derek, I love you. You're my son, and I want you to be happy and successful. But I won't be made to feel ashamed of who I am in my own home by anyone, including your wife." "I know, Mom. I'll talk to her." "Will you?" "Because this morning she told me that my clothes reflect poorly on your professional image. She said that successful people surround themselves with other successful people, and implied that I was dragging down the family's social standing. Derek winced. She didn't mean it like that. How did she mean it then? He didn't have an answer for that, and we sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Derek spoke again. Things have been hard for us financially. Madison's been under a lot of stress. Her job at the marketing firm isn't very secure, and with my salary alone, we can't afford to rent anywhere decent. She feels like she's lost control of her life, and I think sometimes she focuses on things she can control, even if they're not really problems. I understood what Derek was trying to say, but it didn't excuse his wife's behavior. Financial stress was real, but it didn't give Madison the right to make me her emotional punching bag. Derek, you and Madison are welcome to stay here as long as you need to get back on your feet. But there are going to be some ground rules moving forward. What kind of ground rules? The kind that make it clear that this is my house, and I won't be criticized or made to feel unwelcome in it. Derek nodded slowly. That's fair, Mom. I'll make sure Madison understands. The next morning, I left for my salon appointment before anyone else was awake. Celestine's was in the historic district downtown, occupying the ground floor of a beautifully restored Victorian building. The interior was all warm wood and soft lighting, with classical music playing softly in the background. Celestine herself was a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and an eye for what worked on different face shapes and body types. She'd been doing my hair for special occasions for over a decade, and she greeted me with genuine warmth. Anna, darling, you look wonderful. I'm so glad you called. Thank you, Celestine. I need a change. Something fresh, but still me. Of course. Let's start with a consultation. We spent 20 minutes discussing options, looking at photos, and talking about what I wanted to achieve. Celestine suggested updating my color, not dramatically different, but richer and more vibrant than my current shade. She also recommended a cut that would frame my face better and be more sophisticated than my current style. You have beautiful bone structure, Anna. We just need to show it off properly. The transformation took 4 hours. Cut, color, style, manicure, and a facial that left my skin glowing. When Celestine finally turned me around to face the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman looking back at me was polished, elegant, and confident. She looked like someone who belonged at charity galas and business dinners, someone who wouldn't be out of place in any social setting. What do you think? Celestine asked. I think I look like myself again, I said, and realized it was true. This wasn't a different person. This was me, just presented in the way I used to present myself when Harold and I were going out together. I drove home feeling like I was carrying a secret. Madison wanted to make my appearance a family issue? Fine. I was about to show her exactly what a well-dressed family member looked like. When I walked into the house, Madison was in the kitchen making herself a salad for lunch. She looked up when she heard my footsteps and her fork froze halfway to her mouth. Anna? Did you get your hair done? I did. Do you like it? Madison set down her fork and stared at me. I could see her brain trying to process what she was seeing. The woman who'd been wearing ratty jeans and old sweaters yesterday was now standing in front of her looking like she'd stepped out of a high-end magazine. You look different. Different good or different bad? Just different. Madison seemed flustered, like she'd been prepared for one version of me and was having trouble adjusting to this updated model. It's very polished. Thank you. I thought it was time for a change. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Madison had delivered her lecture about my embarrassing appearance 24 hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. So, I said casually, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about appearance and image and how important it is for families to present themselves well. Madison shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Anna, about that. No, you were absolutely right. Image does matter. People do make judgments based on how we present ourselves to the world. I'm glad you understand. which is why I've decided to make some changes. Starting with my wardrobe. Madison looked confused. Your wardrobe? Well, you pointed out that my current clothes were embarrassing the family, so I'm going to start dressing more appropriately for someone in my position. Your position? I smiled, sweetly. As the owner of this house, as someone who's been successful enough to provide free housing to family members who need help getting back on their feet, as the widow of a man who left me very well provided for. The color started to drain from Madison's face as she began to understand where I was going with this. I've decided to start wearing some of the nicer clothes I put away after Harold died. The designer pieces, the jewelry, the things that reflect my actual financial situation rather than my emotional state. That's great, Anna. I'm so glad you approve. In fact, I'm planning to wear my diamond necklace to dinner tonight. The one Harold gave me for our 25th anniversary. It's been in the jewelry box for 2 years, but I think it's time to bring it out again. Madison was beginning to look genuinely uncomfortable, and I was just getting started. I was also thinking about redecorating some of the common areas, maybe hiring an interior designer, updating the furniture, making sure everything looks appropriately successful and well-maintained. You don't need to do all that. Oh, but I do. You've opened my eyes to how important these things are. I mean, if my old jeans and sweaters were embarrassing the family, imagine what guests must think about the outdated throw pillows in the living room. I stood up and rinsed my teacup in the sink, taking my time and letting Madison stew in the implications of what I was saying. I think I'll start with the guest bedroom, I said conversationally. You know, the room you and Derek are staying in. It could use some updating. New paint, new furniture, maybe a complete redesign. Of course, that might be disruptive to your living situation. Madison's face was now completely pale. Anna, I think there might be some misunderstanding. No, misunderstanding at all. You've helped me realize that I need to take more pride in my appearance and my home. I'm simply following through on your excellent advice. I walked toward the kitchen door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Madison? I've made some other changes too. I called my financial advisor yesterday to make sure I understand all my options regarding the house and its occupants. Very informative conversation. And with that, I left Madison sitting alone in the kitchen, probably wondering what exactly she'd unleashed with her little intervention about my embarrassing clothes. That evening, I put on the black cashmere dress I'd pulled from the back of my closet. It fit perfectly, hugging my figure in all the right places while maintaining an air of sophisticated elegance. The diamond necklace caught the light beautifully against the dark fabric, and my newly styled hair completed the transformation. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who belonged in boardrooms and country clubs, not someone anyone would dare call embarrassing. I could hear Derek and Madison talking in hushed tones in their room as I walked past their door toward the stairs. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they heard my heels clicking against the hardwood floor of the hallway. Downstairs, I'd prepared a simple but elegant dinner. Herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and a bottle of wine Harold and I had been saving for a special occasion. I figured this qualified. Derek appeared first, his eyes widening when he saw me. Mom, you look incredible. Thank you, sweetheart. I thought I'd make an effort. Madison descended the stairs more slowly, taking in every detail of my appearance with barely concealed shock. She'd changed into what I suspected was her most expensive outfit, a burgundy dress that probably cost a week's worth of groceries. But next to my effortless elegance, she looked like she was trying too hard. The table looks lovely, Derek said, attempting to fill the awkward silence that had settled over the dining room. I thought we should start eating together as a family more often, I replied, pouring wine into 3 glasses. Madison made such good points yesterday about presentation and keeping up appearances. I realized I've been letting standards slip since your father died. Madison accepted her wineglass with trembling fingers. Anna, about yesterday? No need to apologize, dear. You were absolutely right. Image matters, especially for families like ours. I raised my glass in toast. To new beginnings and higher standards. We clinked glasses, though Madison's heart clearly wasn't in it. Throughout dinner, I regaled them with stories from the old days, charity events Harold and I had attended, business dinners where image and presentation had indeed mattered, social circles where we'd moved with confidence and grace. I remember this one gala, I said, cutting my salmon with precise movements, where the wife of one of Harold's biggest clients showed up underdressed. Not inappropriately dressed, mind you, just casual compared to everyone else. The whispers followed her all evening. Harold said it affected her husband's standing at the company for months afterward. Madison shifted uncomfortably in her chair. That seems harsh. Oh, it was. But that's how these circles work. People make assumptions based on appearances, fair or not. I took a sip of wine and smiled pleasantly. Of course, the reverse is also true. When people see you presenting yourself well, doors open. Opportunities arise. Derek was looking back and forth between his wife and mother like he was watching a tennis match, clearly sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite identify. Speaking of opportunities, I continued, I ran into Eleanor Whitman at the salon today. You remember Eleanor, Derek? She's on the board of the Riverside Country Club. She mentioned they're looking for new members, particularly families with strong community ties. This was a complete fabrication, but Madison didn't know that. I watched her eyes light up with interest despite herself. The country club? Derek asked. Very exclusive, very prestigious. The kind of place where business deals get made on the golf course and partnerships are formed over dinner. Eleanor said she'd be happy to sponsor our application. Madison leaned forward slightly. That sounds wonderful. Of course, membership is quite expensive, and they have strict standards about... I paused delicately. Presentation. Family presentation. They consider the whole family unit when evaluating applications. The implication hung in the air like expensive perfume. Madison was beginning to understand that the game had shifted, and she was no longer the one calling the shots. After dinner, Derek excused himself to take a work call, leaving Madison and me alone with the dishes. I began clearing the table, my diamond necklace catching the light as I moved. Anna, Madison said quietly, I owe you an apology. I looked up from stacking plates. For what, dear? For what I said yesterday. About your clothes, about embarrassing the family. It was inappropriate and hurtful. Was it untrue? Madison blinked, clearly not expecting that response. What do you mean? You said my appearance was embarrassing to the family and might hurt Derek's career. Was that assessment incorrect? Well, no, but so you were telling the truth, as you saw it. Why apologize for honesty? Madison looked confused and frustrated. Because it wasn't my place to say those things. Wasn't it? You're family now. Family members look out for each other, help each other improve. If you saw a problem, shouldn't you address it? I guess, but the only issue I have, Madison, is that your concerns seem to be one-sided. One-sided? I set down the plates and turned to face her fully. You were worried about how my appearance reflected on the family, but you didn't seem to consider how your behavior might reflect on us as well. Madison's face flushed. My behavior? Living rent-free in someone else's home while criticizing their lifestyle choices. That could be seen as ungrateful, don't you think? Some people might even call it tacky. The word tacky hit Madison like a slap. In her world of carefully curated appearances, being called tacky was one of the worst insults imaginable. I wasn't being ungrateful. Of course you weren't. Just like I wasn't intentionally embarrassing anyone. We both had the best intentions, didn't we? Madison nodded slowly, beginning to understand that she was being outmaneuvered. The difference is, I continued, loading dishes into the dishwasher with practiced efficiency. I can afford to upgrade my wardrobe whenever I choose. The question is whether you can afford to upgrade your living situation if needed. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Madison's face went white. Anna, please. I made a mistake. I was stressed, and I took it out on you inappropriately. Can't we just forget this happened? Forget it? But Madison, you've opened my eyes to so many important truths. Why would I want to forget that? Just then my phone rang. It was Jennifer, my eldest daughter. Mom, perfect timing. I just got off the phone with the wedding planner. Wedding planner? I'd forgotten that Jennifer had news to share when she'd texted me yesterday. Wedding planner? For my renewal ceremony. Tom and I decided to renew our vows for our 20th anniversary. We're planning something elegant. Maybe 50 guests, nice venue, the works. I wanted to ask if you'd help me plan it. I glanced at Madison, who was listening to every word with a growing alarm. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. When were you thinking? Spring, maybe April or May. And Mom, I was hoping you'd wear something really special. I know you have all those beautiful dresses from when you and Dad used to go to events. It would mean so much to me to see you dressed up again. I'd be honored, Jennifer. In fact, I just started wearing some of those pieces again. I had my hair done today, and I'm wearing the diamond necklace Dad gave me right now. Really? That's amazing. I can't wait to see you. Maybe we could go shopping together for the ceremony. Make a day of it. I'd love that. Let's plan on it. Soon. After I hung up, Madison was staring at me with something approaching panic. Your daughter's vow renewal sounds lovely, she said weakly. It does, doesn't it? Jennifer has such good taste in these things. She knows how to put together events that are both elegant and meaningful. I finished loading the dishwasher and wiped down the counters. She gets that from Harold's side of the family. They always knew how to present themselves appropriately for any occasion. Madison flinched at the word appropriately. Of course, planning a wedding renewal will be expensive. The venue, the catering, photography. I'll probably need to dip into some investments to help her make it special. This was another fabrication, but Madison didn't need to know that. I wanted her to understand that I had resources she didn't, options she couldn't access, and family connections that didn't include her. I should probably start thinking about my own wardrobe for the event too, I continued. Maybe something custom-made. There's a designer downtown who did several pieces for me years ago. Beautiful work. Very exclusive. Madison's hands were clenched in her lap now, her knuckles white with tension. Actually, Madison, I've been meaning to ask you something. What? How's the job search going? I know you mentioned your position at the marketing firm isn't very secure. Madison's face crumpled slightly. It's challenging. The market is tough right now. I'm sure it is. And with Derek's schedule at the law firm, it must be hard for you to network and make connections, especially without the right social opportunities. What do you mean? Well, so many business relationships are built through social connections. Country club memberships, charity events, dinner parties with the right people. Without access to those circles, it's difficult to build the kind of network that leads to better opportunities. Madison was beginning to look genuinely distressed. I suppose that's true. Of course, once you and Derek are back on your feet financially, you'll be able to afford those kinds of memberships and social obligations. But until then? I shrugged sympathetically. The conversation was interrupted by Derek returning from his phone call. That was Peterson from the firm, he said, loosening his tie. Big case coming up might mean longer hours for the next few weeks. That's wonderful, dear. Success requires sacrifice. I kissed his cheek, my diamond necklace brushing against his shirt. Madison and I were just discussing social opportunities and how they relate to career advancement. Derek looked confused. Social opportunities? Your mother was telling me about networking and professional connections, Madison said quietly. Oh, right. Yeah, it's true. A lot of business happens outside the office. Client dinners, firm events, that sort of thing. Speaking of which, I said casually, when is your next firm event? I'd love to meet some of your colleagues. Derek brightened. Actually, there's a partners' dinner next month. Spouses are invited. How lovely. I haven't been to a proper business dinner in ages. I'll have to find something appropriate to wear. I could practically see the gears turning in Madison's head. She was imagining me at Derek's work event, dressed in designer clothes and diamonds, charming his colleagues and their wives while she struggled to keep up with conversations about social circles she couldn't access. I should probably start shopping soon, I continued. Something that makes the right impression. First impressions matter so much in professional settings, don't they, Madison? Madison nodded mutely, trapped by her own earlier arguments about the importance of appearance and presentation. Well, I said, gathering my purse and keys, I think I'll go for a little drive, clear my head and think about all these exciting changes ahead. As I headed for the door, I heard Madison whisper urgently to Derek, but I couldn't make out the words. Whatever she was saying, I had a feeling it wasn't about my embarrassing clothes anymore. The game had changed, and Madison was beginning to realize she'd picked a fight with someone who had resources, connections, and most importantly, the legal right to change her living situation whenever she chose. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. The next few days brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in the household dynamics. Madison had become quiet, almost meek, avoiding me when possible, and speaking in carefully measured tones when conversation was unavoidable. She'd also started dressing more formally around the house, as if trying to prove she could meet whatever standards she imagined I was now setting. Derek seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, caught up in his big case and the promise of advancement it might bring. He'd always been focused when work demanded it, able to compartmentalize in a way that served him well professionally, but sometimes left him blind to family tensions. On Thursday morning, I received a call that would change everything. Mrs. Richardson, this is Janet Mills from Prestige Property Management. I hope I'm not calling too early. I glanced at the clock. It was 8:30. Perfectly reasonable. Not at all, Janet. What can I do for you? I'm calling about your rental property on DIL Elmwood Drive. The tenants gave notice last month, and we've had several inquiries about it. Are you planning to put it back on the market? I paused, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Elmwood Drive. I'd completely forgotten about the rental property. Harold and I had bought as an investment 15 years ago. After he died, I'd turned the management over to Prestige and tried not to think about it. The income went directly into a separate account that I rarely touched. Could you remind me of the details? It's been a while since I've thought about that property. Of course, it's a lovely 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a fenced yard and attached garage. We've been renting it for $2,800 a month. But given the current market, we could probably get $3,200 or $3,400 for a new lease. $3,000 a month. More than enough for a young couple to live comfortably, especially if they weren't paying for housing elsewhere. Mrs. Richardson, are you still there? Yes. Sorry. Just thinking. Could you email me photos and the current condition report? I'd like to see what shape it's in. Absolutely. Should I go ahead and start showing it to prospective tenants? Give me a few days to decide. I'll be in touch soon. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone. The timing was almost too perfect. Here I was, dealing with house guests who'd overstayed their welcome, and suddenly I had a vacant rental property that could solve everyone's problems. But first, I needed to see exactly what kind of shape it was in. I called Janet back. Could I schedule a walkthrough? I'd like to see the property in person before making any decisions. Of course. Are you free this afternoon around 2? Perfect. The Elmwood property was in Riverside Heights. a middle-class neighborhood about 20 minutes from my house. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, and the kind of quiet suburban atmosphere that young professionals found appealing. As I pulled into the driveway, I could see why it had been easy to rent. Janet was waiting for me with a thick folder of paperwork and a cheerful smile. "Mrs. Richardson, so good to finally meet you in person. Your husband was such a gentleman. I was sorry to hear about his passing." "Thank you, Janet. Now let's see what we're working with." The house was in excellent condition. Hardwood floors throughout, updated kitchen with granite countertops, spacious living areas that flowed naturally from room to room. The master bedroom was generous, with a walk-in closet and ensuite bathroom that included both a shower and a soaking tub. "The previous tenants took excellent care of it," Janet explained as we toured the rooms. "They were here for 3 years and treated it like their own home." I nodded, running my hand along the smooth granite island in the kitchen. "What kind of timeline are we looking at if I decided to rent it again?" "We could have it market ready within a week. Clean the carpets, touch up some paint, basic staging. With the current demand, I'd expect multiple applications within the first month. And the rental income? Like I mentioned on the phone, we could easily get $3,200, possibly more with the right tenants. Young professionals, maybe a couple just starting out. This neighborhood is very popular with that demographic. Young professionals, like Derek and Madison." "Janet, hypothetically, if I had family members who needed housing, what would be the best way to handle that arrangement?" "Through the property management company, absolutely. Even with family, it's important to have proper lease agreements, documented rent payments, clear expectations about maintenance and responsibilities. It protects everyone involved." "And if the family members needed time to get financially established? We could work out a graduated rent schedule or start with a below-market rate that increases over time. Whatever arrangement you're comfortable with, as long as it's properly documented." I walked through the house one more time, imagining Derek and Madison living here. It would be perfect for them, close enough to Derek's office for an easy commute, in a neighborhood that matched Madison's aspirations for respectability, with enough space for them to feel like adults rather than house guests. "I'd like to move forward with preparing it for rent," I told Janet. "But I want to handle the tenant selection personally." "Of course. I'll get the cleaning and touch-ups scheduled immediately." That evening, I waited until after dinner to bring up the subject. Derek was relaxing in the living room with a glass of wine, scrolling through case documents on his tablet. Madison was curled up on the other end of the couch, reading a magazine about interior design, probably planning renovations she couldn't afford. "I had an interesting phone call today," I said, settling into my chair with my own glass of wine. Derek looked up. "Oh?" "From the property management company that handles the rental house on Elmwood Drive. You remember that house, Derek? The one your father and I bought as an investment." Derek nodded slowly. "The 3-bedroom in Riverside Heights. I remember." "Well, the tenants moved out, and the property manager wants to know if I'm ready to rent it again." I took a sip of wine, watching Madison's reaction in my peripheral vision. "I went to look at it this afternoon." Madison had stopped pretending to read her magazine. "How did it look?" Derek asked. "Beautiful. Really beautiful. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, lovely master suite. The kind of place that would be perfect for a young couple just starting out." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. "The rental market is incredibly strong right now," I continued. "The property manager thinks we could get over $3,000 a month for it." Madison set down her magazine entirely now, giving up all pretense of not paying attention. "3,000? Derek whistled softly. "That's a good return on investment." "It is. Although..." I paused thoughtfully, swirling the wine in my glass. "I've been wondering if renting to strangers is really the best approach." "What do you mean?" This from Madison, her first contribution to the conversation. "Well, rental properties can be tricky. You never know how tenants will treat your investment. Will they take care of the floors? Keep the yard maintained? Pay rent on time? It's always a gamble with people you don't know. Derek was beginning to look like he understood where this was heading. But family, I continued. Family you can trust. Family has a vested interest in maintaining relationships, in being responsible and respectful. Madison's face had gone very still. Mom, Derek said carefully, are you suggesting... I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for you and Madison to have your own space again. This house is wonderful for visits, but I imagine you'd both like the privacy and independence that comes with your own home. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it without speaking. The Elmwood house would be perfect for you two. 3 bedrooms, 1 for yourselves, 1 for an office, 1 for guests when your families visit. Beautiful neighborhood, good schools if you decide to have children someday, close to Derek's office. Mom, that's incredibly generous. But we can't afford... Who said anything about market rate? I interrupted gently. Family rates are different from stranger rates. We could work out something that fits your budget while you get established. I could see the wheels turning in both their heads. For Derek, it was probably relief at the prospect of independence combined with gratitude for my generosity. For Madison, it was more complex. Relief mixed with suspicion, gratitude tempered by the dawning realization that accepting this offer would put her even more in my debt. What kind of family rate? Madison asked quietly. Well, let's see. Derek, what's reasonable for your current budget? Derek looked uncomfortable discussing finances, but he answered honestly. We could probably manage $1,500 a month, maybe $1,800 if I get this promotion. $1,500 sounds perfect for a start. We could put together a proper lease agreement, everything above board and documented. You'd be responsible for utilities and basic maintenance, just like any other tenants. That's amazingly generous, Mom. Madison was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Why? She asked bluntly. Why what, dear? Why are you offering this, after everything that's happened this week? It was a fair question, and I respected her for asking it directly. Because you're family, Madison, and because you were right about some things you said earlier. Both Derek and Madison looked confused. You said that successful families support each other, that we should care about how we present ourselves to the world. Well, part of presenting well as a family is making sure everyone has what they need to succeed. I finished my wine and set the glass on the side table. Derek, you're up for a promotion that could change your career trajectory. You need to be able to entertain colleagues, host dinner parties, present yourself as someone who's stable and established. Living with your mother, however temporarily, doesn't send that message. Derek nodded slowly. And Madison, you need space to build your own social and professional networks. It's hard to do that when you're living as a house guest, even a welcome one. Madison's eyes were bright with unshed tears, though whether they were from gratitude or something else, I couldn't tell. There would be conditions, of course, I continued. What kind of conditions? Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Standard lease conditions. No smoking, no pets without permission, no illegal activities, rent paid on time, property maintained in good condition. I paused. And one personal condition, which is that we maintain a respectful relationship moving forward. All of us. We're family, and family members treat each other with courtesy and consideration. The message was clear. No more lectures about embarrassing clothes or inappropriate appearances. That sounds more than fair, Derek said. Madison nodded silently. Wonderful. I'll call Janet tomorrow and have her draw up a lease agreement. You could probably move in within 2 weeks if you're interested. Derek stood up and hugged me. Mom, I don't know how to thank you. Just be happy, sweetheart. That's all the thanks I need. As Derek and Madison headed upstairs to discuss this new development in private, I remained in my chair, finishing the last of my wine. Through the thin walls, I could hear the murmur of their conversation, too quiet to make out words, but intense enough to suggest they had a lot to talk about. Madison had asked why I was making this offer, and I'd given her the diplomatic answer. The real answer was more complex. Yes, I wanted them to have their independence, and yes, I thought it would be better for everyone involved. But there was also a strategic element to it. By offering them the rental house at below-market rates, I was simultaneously solving the immediate problem of our living arrangement and creating a new dynamic where Madison would be my tenant rather than my house guest. Tenants had different obligations than family members staying temporarily. Tenants could be evicted for violating lease terms. Tenants paid rent, which created a formal business relationship that was much easier to enforce than family boundaries. Most importantly, tenants who didn't pay rent or who violated their lease agreements could be legally removed from the property. I wasn't planning for Madison to fail, but I was certainly planning for all possibilities. And if she ever decided to critique my appearance or my lifestyle choices again, she'd be doing it as someone who was paying me rent rather than someone I was helping out of the goodness of my heart. The power dynamic had shifted permanently, and Madison was about to sign a legal document that would make that shift official. The lease signing was scheduled for the following Friday afternoon at Janet's office. I arrived early, wearing a navy blue blazer with pearl earrings and my hair, styled in the sophisticated cut that had become my new signature look. The transformation from grieving widow in comfortable clothes to polished property owner was now complete, and I wanted to make sure everyone understood the shift. Derek and Madison arrived precisely on time, Madison clutching a folder of documents and looking nervous. She'd dressed carefully for the occasion, a conservative dress suit that suggested she understood this was a business transaction, not a family favor. Janet had prepared everything meticulously: lease agreements, property condition reports, rental, payment schedules, and a thick packet of tenant rights and responsibilities. She spread the documents across the conference table like a general laying out battle plans. "This is pretty standard," Janet explained, pointing to various sections of the lease. 12-month initial term, renewable by mutual agreement. Security deposit equal to 1 month's rent, which in this case would be $1,500. Madison's face went slightly pale. "Security deposit? Standard practice," I said smoothly. "It protects the property against damage and ensures the lease terms are taken seriously." Derek reached over and squeezed Madison's hand reassuringly. "We can handle it, Mad. I got word yesterday that the Peterson case is definitely going to trial, which means bonus potential." Janet continued reviewing the lease terms. No unauthorized occupants, no subletting without written permission, tenant responsible for utilities and basic maintenance, landlord responsible for major repairs and structural issues. Standard language that I'd signed dozens of times in other business contexts, but which clearly felt overwhelming to Madison. "What about the family rate arrangement?" Madison asked when Janet reached the rent section. "It's all documented here," Janet replied, showing her the relevant clause. Initial rent of $1,500 per month for the first 12 months, with a provision for review and potential adjustment based on the tenant's financial circumstances and market conditions. The language was deliberately vague, giving me flexibility to raise the rent if needed while protecting Derek and Madison's current budget constraints. Madison read the clause twice, clearly trying to understand all its implications. "Mrs. Richardson," Janet addressed me directly, "you'll need to sign as the property owner, and then Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell will sign as tenants." "Actually," Madison said quietly, "it's Ms. Chambers. I kept my maiden name." An interesting detail I hadn't known. In Madison's social circle, hyphenated names or keeping maiden names was probably seen as modern and professional, but it also meant she had fewer legal protections than a wife might have in some circumstances. "Of course," Janet made the correction on the documents. "Mr. Hartwell and Ms. Chambers." We spent the next hour reviewing every clause, every condition, every provision in the lease. Janet was thorough and professional, making sure everyone understood their rights and obligations. Derek asked practical questions about maintenance procedures and utility transfers. Madison asked more pointed questions about lease modification procedures and termination clauses. "What happens if we need to break the lease early?" Madison asked. "There's a 60-day notice requirement and a penalty equal to 2 months' rent," Janet explained. "Unless there are extenuating circumstances that make continuing the lease impossible." "What kind of extenuating circumstances?" Janet glanced at me, then back at Madison. "Job loss, medical emergencies, family situations that require relocation, the usual things that make it impossible for tenants to fulfill their obligations." I noticed Madison storing this information carefully, as if she was already planning potential exit strategies. Smart, but also telling about her mindset going into this arrangement. Finally, it was time to sign. Derek went first, his signature confident and decisive. Madison hesitated for a moment, pen hovering over the signature line, before writing her name with careful precision. Then it was my turn. As I signed my name as property owner and landlord, I felt the satisfaction of a chess player moving a piece into a position of absolute control. Madison was no longer my houseguest who I was helping out of family obligation. She was now my tenant, bound by legal contract to pay rent and follow lease terms or face eviction. "Congratulations," Janet said, gathering the signed documents. "You should be able to move in this weekend. The utilities have been transferred, and we'll have the keys ready for pickup tomorrow morning." Derek shook hands with Janet and thanked her profusely. Madison was quieter, but she did manage a polite thank you. As we walked to our cars, Derek was practically bouncing with excitement. "Our own place again, Mad. Can you believe it?" Madison smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's wonderful, Derek. Your mother has been incredibly generous." I paused at my car door. "Family takes care of family, Madison. I'm sure you'd do the same if positions were reversed." The comment was carefully neutral, but Madison caught the implication. If positions were reversed, would she offer the same generosity? Would she house family members rent-free for months, then provide them with below-market housing when they needed independence? "Of course," Madison replied, but her voice lacked conviction. That weekend, I helped Derek and Madison move their belongings from my house to their new rental. It wasn't much. They'd been living out of suitcases and boxes for months, having sold most of their furniture when their previous living situation fell apart. The empty rooms of the Elmwood house echoed as we carried boxes inside. Derek was already talking about furniture shopping and room arrangements, excited about the prospect of creating a real home again. Madison was more subdued, walking through the rooms with the measured steps of someone conducting an inspection. "The master bedroom is lovely," she said, standing in the doorway of what would be their room. "Harold and I looked at houses in this neighborhood when we were first married," I told her. "We couldn't afford it then, but we always said someday we'd live somewhere like this." "Did you ever regret not moving here?" It was an unexpectedly personal question, and I considered my answer carefully. No. We built our life where we ended up, and it was a good life. But I think there's value in having different experiences at different stages. "This house is perfect for where you and Derek are now." Madison nodded, running her hand along the window frame that looked out onto the tree-lined street. "Anna, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you trust me?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, after everything that's happened, after the things I said about your clothes and your appearance, do you actually trust me to be a good tenant? Or is this arrangement something else?" I studied Madison's face, looking for clues about what she was really asking. Her expression was open but wary, like someone expecting bad news but hoping to be wrong. "Madison, I think you're intelligent, capable, and fundamentally decent. I also think you sometimes let anxiety and insecurity drive you to make choices that don't reflect who you really are." She flinched slightly at the word insecurity. I'm offering you this house because I believe Derek needs stability to succeed professionally, and because I think you need space to figure out who you want to be without feeling like you're being judged every day. And if I disappoint you, if I make mistakes or don't live up to your expectations, then we'll deal with those situations as they arise, like adults. You're not my child, Madison. You're my tenant. As long as you pay rent on time and take care of the property, we won't have any problems. It was a clear message. Our relationship was now defined by the lease agreement, not by family obligations or personal feelings. Madison seemed to understand. That's probably better for everyone. I think so. Derek called from the kitchen, asking for help arranging the few pieces of furniture they'd managed to bring. As Madison and I walked toward his voice, I felt a sense of closure about the living arrangement chapter of our relationship. The boundary was now clearly defined, legally documented and enforceable. But I also sensed that Madison understood something else, that her attempt to shame me about my appearance had backfired spectacularly. Instead of making me feel small and embarrassed, she'd awakened something in me that had been dormant since Harold's death. She'd reminded me that I had resources, connections, and power that I'd been neglecting. Over the next few weeks, Derek and Madison settled into their new home while I settled into my newly reclaimed independence. The house felt different without house guests, quieter, but also more authentically mine again. I could wear whatever I wanted without judgment, eat breakfast in my pajamas if I chose, and make decisions based on my own preferences rather than considering how they might affect other people living under my roof. But I didn't retreat back into my comfortable old clothes and hermit-like existence. The transformation Madison had inadvertently triggered continued to evolve. I kept my standing appointment at Celestine's salon, maintained the upgraded wardrobe, and started accepting social invitations I'd been declining for 2 years. Eleanor Whitman did indeed call about the country club membership, though it wasn't quite the spontaneous conversation I'd implied to Madison. I'd actually called Eleanor and asked about the process, discovering that membership was both more and less exclusive than Madison probably imagined. The application process is fairly straightforward, Eleanor explained over lunch at her favorite downtown restaurant. Financial stability, community ties, references from current members. The main thing they're looking for is people who'll contribute to the club culture and participate in activities. What about family considerations? Spouses are automatically included in memberships, but adult children have to apply separately if they want their own membership later. Why do you ask? I sipped my wine thoughtfully. Just curious about how these things work. Harold and I never got around to joining anywhere, and I'm thinking it might be time to expand my social circle. Eleanor laughed. Anna, you'd be welcomed with open arms. The club needs members with your combination of class and authenticity. Too many people join just for the status symbol without understanding what community membership actually means. What does it mean? Responsibility. Contributing your time and talents, not just your membership fees. Supporting the club's charitable activities, participating in committees, being someone other members can rely on. It sounded appealing, actually. Since Harold's death, I'd been focused on survival, getting through each day, managing grief, maintaining basic routines. But maybe it was time to think about contribution again, about being part of something larger than my own small world. I'd like to learn more about the application process, I told Eleanor. Wonderful. I'll have them send you an information packet. As I drove home from lunch, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. Madison's criticism about my embarrassing appearance had been intended to make me smaller, more manageable, more willing to conform to her vision of appropriate family behavior. Instead, it had reminded me that I had choices, resources, and strength I'd been neglecting. I was a successful woman with financial independence, social connections, and the kind of life experience that came from building something meaningful with a partner I'd loved deeply. Madison had made the mistake of assuming that grief had permanently diminished me. that widowhood had reduced me to someone who could be easily controlled through shame and criticism. She was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. 3 weeks. Into Derek and Madison's new living arrangement, I received an unexpected phone call from Derek's supervisor at the law firm. "Mrs. Richardson, this is James Patterson from Whitfield, Barnes & Associates. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "Not at all, Mr. Patterson. How can I help you?" "I'm calling about Derek. He's mentioned you several times during our conversations about his career development, and I wanted to reach out personally to invite you to our annual partners' dinner next Friday." This was interesting. Derek had mentioned the dinner weeks ago, but I hadn't expected a direct invitation from his supervisor. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Patterson. Derek speaks of you with such respect and admiration. He's told us about your late husband's business, background, and your own involvement in community activities. We'd be honored to have you join us." I could read between the lines. This wasn't just social courtesy. This was Derek's firm evaluating the complete package, including family connections and social standing. Madison's concerns about family image affecting Derek's career weren't entirely unfounded, though she'd misunderstood which direction the influence would flow. I'd be delighted to attend. Excellent. It's black tie, 7 o'clock at the Riverside Country Club. Derek can provide the details. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet kitchen considering the implications. Derek's firm was clearly interested in promoting him, and they wanted to meet the family members who would be part of his expanded social and professional circle. This dinner would be my debut as Derek's sophisticated, well-connected mother rather than the grieving widow in comfortable clothes that Madison had been so concerned about. I called Derek immediately. "Mom, that's fantastic. Mr. Patterson specifically asked to meet you. He said he was impressed by your background when we discussed family during my performance review." "What exactly did you tell him about my background?" "The truth. That you and Dad were involved in charity work, that you understand business and social dynamics, that you've always been supportive of my career." "Why?" "Just curious. I want to make sure I make a good impression." "Mom, you'll be perfect. You always are." If only Madison could hear this conversation. Her fears about embarrassing the family had been projection. She was the one who felt inadequate in professional social settings, not me. The next morning, I drove to the most exclusive shopping district in the city. It had been years since I'd bought formal evening wear, and I wanted something that would make exactly the right impression at Derek's firm dinner. At Nordstrom, I was assisted by a personal shopper named Patricia, who had an eye for elegant classics. Together, we selected a midnight blue floor-length dress in silk crepe that emphasized my figure, while maintaining sophisticated restraint. The neckline was modest but flattering, perfect for showcasing Harold's diamond necklace. "This dress is timeless," Patricia assured me as I stood before the three-way mirror. "You'll be able to wear it to formal events for years to come." I also selected new evening shoes, a matching clutch, and had my existing jewelry cleaned and polished to complement the outfit. The total came to more than Madison probably spent on clothes in 6 months, but I could afford it without impacting my budget significantly. That afternoon, I called Madison. "How are you settling into the new house?" "Very well, thank you." "Derek loves having his own office space, and I'm enjoying the kitchen. It's beautifully designed." "I'm glad you're comfortable. I wanted to let you know that I'll be attending Derek's firm dinner on Friday evening." There was a pause. "The partners' dinner?" "Yes. Mr. Patterson called to invite me personally. Apparently Derek has mentioned me in his career discussions with the firm." Another pause, longer this time. That's wonderful, Anna. I thought you should know in case Derek mentions it. I wouldn't want you to feel left out, but the invitation was specifically for family members who might be part of Derek's expanded professional network. The implication was clear. Madison wasn't considered part of that network, at least not yet. As Derek's girlfriend turned tenant rather than his wife, She didn't have the same social standing for firm events. Of course. I hope you have a lovely time. Thank you, dear. I'm quite looking forward to it. Friday evening arrived with perfect autumn weather. I spent the afternoon at Celestine's having my hair styled in an elegant updo that would showcase both the dress and the diamond necklace. When I looked in the salon mirror, I saw a woman who belonged at exclusive events, someone who could hold her own in any social situation. Derek picked me up at 7:15, looking handsome in his tuxedo and clearly nervous about the evening. Ahead. Mom, you look incredible, absolutely stunning. Thank you, sweetheart. You look quite distinguished yourself. As we drove toward the country club, Derek filled me in on the key players I'd be meeting. Mr. Patterson is the senior partner who's been mentoring me. His wife, Catherine, is lovely, very involved in arts charities. The managing partner is William Barnes. He's the one who makes final decisions about promotions. His wife, Elizabeth, chairs the hospital fundraising committee. Anyone else I should know about? Marcus Webb, the corporate practice leader, and his wife, Sarah. They're probably closest to your and Dad's age, very interested in community involvement and social responsibility. The Riverside Country Club was even more elegant than I'd expected. Valet parking, doormen in formal uniforms, and a grand entrance that spoke of old money and established tradition. As we walked through the foyer toward the private dining room, I felt completely at ease. This was my element, the social stratum where Harold and I had belonged before grief temporarily removed me from it. The partners and their wives were gracious and welcoming. James Patterson was a distinguished man in his early 50s with silver hair and intelligent eyes. His wife, Catherine, immediately engaged me in conversation about local theater productions and arts funding. Derek mentioned that you and your late husband were supporters of community theater, Catherine said. We were. Harold believed that arts support was essential for a thriving community. I've been less involved since his passing, but I'm starting to think about re-engaging. We'd love to have you join our planning committee. Experience and wisdom are always welcome. William Barnes was more formal but equally engaging. He asked thoughtful questions about my background and seemed genuinely interested in my responses. His wife Elizabeth and I discovered mutual acquaintances from charity work, creating an immediate connection. But it was Marcus and Sarah Webb who surprised me most. Marcus was Harold's age and had known my husband professionally through industry associations. Harold Richardson was one of the most respected businessmen in this city, Marcus told me over cocktails. He had integrity and vision, qualities that seem increasingly rare these days. That's very kind of you to say. Not kind, just true. Derek has those same qualities. He's going to do very well at the firm. Sarah Webb leaned closer. Marcus has been singing Derek's praises for months. Your son has impressed everyone with his work ethic and judgment. As the evening progressed, it became clear that Derek's career prospects were excellent and that my presence was being evaluated as part of his overall profile. These people were assessing whether Derek came from the kind of family that would enhance the firm's reputation and social standing. I passed that assessment with flying colors. During dinner, I found myself seated between James Patterson and Marcus Webb, perfectly positioned to demonstrate my conversational skills and social awareness. We discussed everything from current events to investment strategies to community development projects. You know, Anna, James said during the main course, Derek has mentioned that you're considering membership here at the club. I've been thinking about it. Eleanor Whitman has been encouraging me to apply. Eleanor's a dear friend and excellent judge of character. I'd be happy to serve as a reference if you decide to move forward. As would I, Marcus added. The club needs members who understand the balance between social enjoyment and community responsibility. By the end of the evening, I had collected 3 offers to serve as membership references, invitations to 2 charitable committees, and genuine connections with people who could become lifelong friends. More importantly, I had clearly established myself as an asset to Derek's professional development rather than a liability. Derek was beaming as we said our goodbyes and headed to the car. "Mom, that was perfect. Mr. Patterson told me privately that he was impressed by your sophistication and warmth. He said it was clear where I learned my people skills." "I'm glad. It went well, sweetheart." "More than well. Mrs. Barnes asked me if you'd be interested in joining the hospital fundraising committee. Mr. Webb wants to introduce you to someone on the museum board. You were a hit." As Derek drove me home, I reflected on how dramatically the evening had exceeded my expectations. Not only had I proven that I could enhance rather than embarrass Derek's professional image, but I'd also opened doors to social opportunities that Madison could never access on her own. When Derek walked me to my door, he hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom, for everything. For the house, for supporting my career, for being exactly who you are." "You don't need to thank me for being your mother, Derek." "Maybe not, but I'm grateful anyway." Madison was worried that, well, she was concerned about tonight, about how everything would go. Was she? She's been anxious about social events since we've been having financial difficulties. She feels like she doesn't fit in with my colleagues and their wives anymore. That must be difficult for her. It is. But seeing you tonight, seeing how naturally you connected with everyone, it makes me realize that confidence comes from authenticity, not from trying to impress people. It was a mature observation from my son, and one that suggested he was beginning to understand the difference between his mother's genuine social skills and his girlfriend's anxious attempts to project an image she couldn't maintain. After Derek left, I sat in my living room still wearing my elegant dress and diamond necklace, sipping a glass of wine and thinking about the evening's success. Madison had been concerned that my appearance would embarrass the family and hurt Derek's career prospects. Instead, my sophisticated presentation and genuine social connections had clearly enhanced his professional standing. The irony was delicious. Madison's criticism had pushed me to reclaim parts of myself that elevated not just my own status, but Derek's as well. Her attempt to diminish me had backfired so completely that I was now positioned as a social asset while she remained on the sidelines, too insecure to participate in the very circles she'd been concerned about impressing. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The partners' dinner had reminded me of my true place in this community's social hierarchy. I belonged at the top, not hiding in comfortable clothes and self-imposed isolation. Madison had awakened something in me that had been dormant since Harold's death, and now that it was fully awakened, I intended to use it. The next phase of my plan was about to begin. 2 days after the partners' dinner, I was organizing Harold's study when I found something that changed everything. Tucked inside a folder marked Investment Properties was a document I'd completely forgotten about. A partnership agreement for a commercial property downtown that Harold had co-owned with 2 other investors. The property was a small office building with retail space on the ground floor, purchased 15 years ago as a long-term investment. According to the agreement, Harold's share was 33%, and upon his death, ownership would transfer to his estate, meaning to me. I immediately called Robert Chen. "Robert, I found some papers in Harold's study about a commercial property on 5th Street. Partnership agreement with Wagner and Associates?" "Oh yes, the 5th Street building. I should have mentioned that during our estate planning discussions. The property has been managed by the other partners since Harold's death, and the income has been going into your investment account quarterly." "How much income are we talking about?" "Let me pull up the records. The building generates about $12,000 a month in rental income, so your share would be roughly $4,000 quarterly, about $16,000 annually. $16,000 a year that I'd been receiving without even noticing it, because it went directly into an investment account I rarely monitored. But more importantly, I was a 1/3 owner of prime commercial real estate in the heart of the business district. "Robert, what are my rights as a partner in this property?" "Full ownership rights for your percentage. You can attend partnership meetings, vote on major decisions, even buy out the other partners if you choose." "Why do you ask?" I'm just trying to understand all of Harold's investments. Could you set up a meeting with the other partners? I'd like to discuss property management and explore some options. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at the offices of Wagner and Associates. Thomas Wagner and Patricia Morrison were both seasoned real estate professionals who had worked with Harold for over a decade. They greeted me with a mixture of professional courtesy and careful assessment. They weren't sure what to expect from Harold's widow entering their business partnership. "Mrs. Richardson," Thomas said as we settled into his conference room, "we've been managing the property conservatively since Harold's passing, maintaining the current tenant mix and focusing on steady income rather than aggressive expansion." "What does the current tenant situation look like?" Patricia consulted her files. "Ground floor retail is fully occupied. A boutique, a coffee shop, and a small restaurant. Upper floors have professional offices, an accounting firm, a law practice, and a marketing consultancy. Marketing consultancy. Something clicked in my memory. Could you tell me more about the marketing consultancy?" "Prestige Marketing Solutions," Thomas replied. "They've been tenants for about 3 years. Small operation, maybe 6 employees. They've been good tenants overall. Pay rent on time, maintain their space well." "What's their lease situation?" "They're month-to-month right now. Their original lease expired 6 months ago, and we've been operating on a temporary extension while they decide whether to renew long-term or relocate. Month-to-month. That meant they could be asked to leave with 30 days' notice, just like any tenant without a long-term lease commitment. I'd like to see the complete tenant files, including payment histories and lease terms." Thomas and Patricia exchanged glances. "Of course. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" "I'm just trying to understand the business thoroughly. Harold always said that successful property management required knowing every detail about your tenants and their situations." We spent the next hour reviewing tenant files, property maintenance records, and financial projections. Everything was professionally managed and financially sound. But when we got to the Prestige Marketing file, I paid special attention to every detail. The business was registered to Madison Chambers. Madison's struggling marketing job that she'd described as insecure? It wasn't a job at all. It was her own business, operating out of space that I now partially owned. She'd been paying rent to my partnership for 3 years, which meant she'd been paying rent to me indirectly without either of us realizing it. "Mrs. Richardson?" Patricia was looking at me with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I was just thinking about something Harold used to say about the interconnectedness of business relationships. He was a wise man. His insights always helped us make better decisions about the property." As I drove home from the meeting, my mind was racing. Madison had been living rent-free in my house while paying rent for office space that I partially owned. She'd been complaining about her insecure job situation when she was actually running her own business. Most importantly, she'd been criticizing my appearance and lifestyle while being financially dependent on me in ways she didn't even understand. The situation was so perfectly ironic that I had to pull over and sit in my car for a few minutes, absorbing the full implications. Madison's business was month-to-month, which meant it was vulnerable. If Prestige Marketing Solutions couldn't afford to renew their lease or were asked to leave, Madison would lose not just her office space, but potentially her entire client base and professional reputation. But I wasn't interested in destroying her business out of spite. That would be petty and ultimately counterproductive. Instead, I was interested in using this information strategically as leverage for ensuring that our future interactions remained respectful and appropriate. That evening, I called Derek. "How are things going with the new house? Is Madison settling in well?" "She loves it, Mom. Having her own space again has really helped her confidence. She's been talking about expanding her business, maybe hiring another employee." "Her business?" "Her marketing consultancy, Prestige Marketing Solutions. She's been building it for several years, and it's finally at the point where it might be profitable enough to support growth." Derek clearly didn't know that I had any connection to Madison's business, which meant Madison didn't know either. The information was my secret to use or not use as circumstances required. That's wonderful, Derek. I'm glad she's finding success. She is. And Mom, she's been different since we moved into the rental house. More relaxed, less anxious about social situations. I think having our own space has helped her feel more secure. That was interesting. Madison's improved mood suggested that removing her from my daily presence had reduced her stress levels significantly. She'd been so focused on competing with me and measuring herself against my lifestyle that living under my roof had become toxic for her mental health. I'm happy to hear that, sweetheart. She's even started talking about us, maybe setting a wedding date. Nothing definite yet, but she seems more optimistic about our future together. Wedding plans. That would complicate the power dynamics significantly, as Derek's wife, Madison, would have different legal protections and social standing than she had as his live-in girlfriend. But it would also create new vulnerabilities, divorce proceedings, property division, custody issues if they had children. How do you feel about that? Honestly, I'm ready. We've been together for 3 years, and living through our financial difficulties has shown me that we can handle challenges together. I love her, Mom, and I want to build a life with her. There was genuine warmth in Derek's voice when he talked about Madison, which reminded me that my son's happiness was ultimately more important than my wounded pride or desire for strategic advantage. Then I'm happy for you both, Derek. Thanks, Mom. Your support means everything to us. After hanging up, I sat in Harold's study thinking about the complexity of family relationships and the unintended consequences of strategic maneuvering. My goal had been to establish appropriate boundaries with Madison and ensure that she treated me with respect. Mission accomplished. She was now my tenant, bound by legal obligations, and clearly understood that I had resources and connections she couldn't match. But Derek's happiness was also important, and Madison's improved mental health since moving out suggested that our living arrangement had been problematic for everyone involved. Sometimes the best strategy was simply creating enough distance for people to coexist peacefully. The question now was what to do with the information about Madison's business. I could use it as additional leverage, ensuring that she understood just how interconnected our financial relationships really were. Or I could keep it as private knowledge, insurance against future conflicts without needing to deploy it unless absolutely necessary. I decided on the latter approach. Knowledge was power, but unused knowledge was often the most powerful of all. The next morning, I called Janet Mills at Prestige Property Management. Janet, I wanted to check on how Derek and Madison are doing as tenants. They've been excellent. Mrs. Richardson. Rent paid on time, property well maintained, no complaints from neighbors. Model tenants, really. I'm glad to hear that. I also wanted to discuss the lease renewal timeline. When will we need to make decisions about extending their current agreement? Well, they're about 8 months into their 12-month lease, so we'd typically start renewal discussions around month 10. But if you have specific concerns or preferences, we can address those earlier. No concerns at all. I just want to make sure we handle the renewal professionally and give them adequate time to make decisions about their future. Of course, should. I assume you're planning to offer renewal at the same terms? Let's see how things develop over the next few months. Family situations can be fluid, and I want to make sure any renewal terms reflect current circumstances. It was a deliberately vague answer that gave me maximum flexibility. If Derek and Madison continued to be respectful tenants and family members, renewal would be straightforward. If problems arose, I had legal recourse through the lease agreement and potential leverage through Madison's business situation. But I hoped it wouldn't come to that. Despite everything that had happened, I genuinely wanted Derek and Madison to succeed. I wanted Derek to find happiness and fulfillment in both his personal and professional life. I wanted Madison to build a successful business and develop the confidence that came from genuine achievement rather than competitive anxiety. Most of all, I wanted our family relationships to be based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries, rather than power struggles and hidden resentments. That afternoon, I received a call from Eleanor Whitman about the country club membership application. Anna, I have wonderful news. The membership committee reviewed your application, and it's been approved unanimously. They were particularly impressed by the references from James Patterson and Marcus Webb. That's fantastic, Eleanor. When would membership begin? Immediately, if you'd like. There's an initiation dinner next Saturday evening where new members are introduced to the club community. It's a lovely tradition. I'd be honored to attend. As I hung up, I realized that my social rehabilitation was now complete. In the span of a few weeks, I'd gone from being a grieving widow in comfortable clothes to being a member of the most exclusive social organization in the city. I had professional connections, charitable committee positions, and a calendar full of social obligations that reflected my actual status in the community. Madison's criticism about my embarrassing appearance had been intended to diminish me. Instead, it had catalyzed a transformation that elevated me far beyond anything I could have achieved while living quietly in grief and isolation. The irony was that Madison would never be able to follow me into these social circles. She lacked the financial resources, family connections, and social confidence necessary for true acceptance in elite society. She could buy expensive clothes and perfect her presentation, but she couldn't buy the kind of authentic belonging that came from decades of community involvement in genuine relationships. I had won more completely than I'd ever intended to win. The question now was whether I would use that victory graciously or vindictively. I chose grace, but with clear boundaries firmly in place. The country club initiation dinner was an elegant affair held in the club's main ballroom, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables draped in crisp white linens. I wore a sophisticated charcoal gray cocktail dress with pearl accessories, striking exactly the right note between formal and approachable. Eleanor introduced me to established members, and I found myself welcomed into conversations about upcoming charity galas, community development projects, and social activities that would fill my calendar for months to come. The evening reinforced something I'd temporarily forgotten during my period of grief-induced isolation. I was genuinely good at this kind of social interaction. Anna, you simply must join our planning committee for the Children's Hospital fundraiser, insisted Margaret Sinclair, a silver-haired woman who chaired several of the club's most prestigious charitable activities. We need someone with your combination of business sense and community connections. I'd be delighted, Margaret. Wonderful. We meet Thursday mornings at 10. I'll have my assistant send you the details. By the end of the evening, I'd committed to 3 committee positions, accepted invitations to 2 upcoming social events, and been asked to consider running for a seat on the club's board of directors in the next election cycle. Dr. Patricia Henley, who served on the hospital board, approached me during cocktails after dinner. I understand you might be interested in expanding your charitable involvement. We're always looking for board members who bring both financial acumen and genuine commitment to our mission. I've been thinking about increasing my community engagement. What would board service involve? Monthly meetings, committee work, and helping with our major fundraising initiatives. The time commitment is significant, but the impact on children's health care in our community is immeasurable. I'd like to learn more. Excellent. Why don't you join me for lunch next week? I can give you a complete overview of our current projects and future goals. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my social landscape had changed. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a lonely widow eating breakfast in my pajamas while my daughter-in-law criticized my appearance. Now, I was a country club member, with a packed social calendar and community leadership opportunities. The transformation felt authentic rather than forced. This wasn't about proving anything to Madison or competing for status. This was about reclaiming parts of myself that had always existed but had been temporarily buried under grief and self-imposed isolation. When I arrived home, there was a Message on my answering machine from Derek. Mom, call me when you get this. Madison and I have some news to share. I called back immediately. Derek, you said you had news? We're engaged. His voice was bright with excitement. I proposed tonight, and she said yes. We wanted you to be among the first to know. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Genuine happiness for Derek, cautious optimism about Madison, and a slight sense of strategic miscalculation. An engagement changed the family dynamics significantly and would require adjustments to my approach. Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you both. Thanks, Mom. We're thinking about a spring wedding, maybe May or June. Nothing too elaborate, but we want it to be special. That sounds lovely. How can I help? Well, actually, we were hoping you might have some suggestions about venues. You and Dad always had such good taste for these kinds of events. This was an opportunity to demonstrate support while also maintaining influence over the wedding planning process. Done correctly, it could strengthen my relationship with both Derek and Madison while ensuring that the wedding reflected well on the entire family. I'd be happy to help with venue research. There are several beautiful locations in the area, depending on what kind of atmosphere you're looking for. That would be amazing. Madison is a little overwhelmed by all the options. Planning a wedding can be stressful. Why don't the three of us have lunch this weekend to discuss ideas? I can share what I've learned from friends who've hosted beautiful events. She'd love that, Mom. Thanks for being so supportive. After hanging up, I considered the implications of Madison's engagement to Derek. As his fiancée and eventual wife, she would have more secure social standing and legal protections, but she would also have more responsibilities as a member of our family, including participating in social events where her behavior would reflect on all of us. The upcoming wedding also presented an opportunity to demonstrate exactly the kind of sophisticated family support that would enhance Derek's professional and social reputation. If I helped plan an elegant, tasteful celebration, it would reinforce my value as a family member while also setting standards for future family events. The next morning, I began researching wedding venues that would be appropriate for Derek's career level and social aspirations. The country club was an obvious option, but there were also historic mansions, elegant hotels, and garden venues that could provide the right combination of beauty and prestige. I also started thinking about the guest list. Derek's colleagues from the law firm would need to be included, which meant the wedding would serve as another opportunity for me to demonstrate my social skills and family connections. Madison's business associates would presumably also attend, creating potential networking opportunities for everyone involved. By the time we met for lunch on Saturday, I had compiled a folder of venue options, catering suggestions, and timeline recommendations. Derek and Madison arrived at the restaurant looking happy but slightly dazed by the complexity of wedding planning. I had no idea there were so many decisions to make, Madison admitted as we settled into our booth. Flowers, music, photography, catering, invitations, it's overwhelming. It doesn't have to be, I assured her. The key is to make decisions systematically, starting with the big picture and working down to details. I opened my folder and spread out photos of potential venues. These are some locations I thought might work well for a spring wedding. Each has different advantages depending on your priorities. Madison's eyes widened as she looked through the options. These are all gorgeous, but they must be incredibly expensive. Some are more expensive than others, but a wedding is an investment in your future as a couple. It's worth doing well. Derek nodded. Mom's right. We want something we'll be proud to remember, and that will make the right impression on our friends and colleagues. Speaking of colleagues, I said, have you thought about the guest list? Derek's firm will probably expect invitations, and Madison, I assume you'll want to include clients and business associates. Madison looked uncomfortable. My business is still pretty small. I don't know if my clients would expect wedding invitations. They might not expect them, but including them could be a nice way to strengthen those relationships. Weddings are wonderful networking opportunities. Derek reached over and squeezed Madison's hand. We don't have to invite everyone, Mad. This is our wedding, not a business conference. Of course, I agreed. But there's nothing wrong with considering how the wedding might benefit your professional relationships. Your father and I made some of our best business connections at social events like weddings. Over the next hour, we discussed budgets, timelines, and priorities. Madison gradually relaxed as we worked through the options systematically, breaking the overwhelming process into manageable decisions. Would you be willing to help with the actual planning? Madison asked as we finished lunch. I know you have experience with this kind of event coordination. I'd be honored to help. Planning your wedding sounds like a wonderful project. Derek beamed. This is going to be perfect. Mom, you're the best. As we left the restaurant, Madison walked beside me while Derek went to get the car. Anna, I owe you an apology. I stopped walking. For what? For the things I said about your clothes, about embarrassing the family. I was wrong, and I was out of line. Madison, no, let me finish. I've been thinking about this since we moved into the rental house. I was stressed and insecure, and I took it out on you inappropriately. You've been nothing but generous and supportive, and I responded by criticizing you. I studied Madison's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. What I saw was genuine regret and what appeared to be authentic growth. I appreciate you saying that, Madison. Stress can make us all say things we don't mean. It's more than that, though. I think I was jealous. Jealous? Of your confidence, your social connections, your financial security? I felt like I couldn't measure up, so I tried to find flaws in you instead of working on my own insecurities. It was a surprisingly mature admission, and one that suggested Madison had done some serious self-reflection during her time away from my house. We all have insecurities, Madison. The key is not letting them damage our relationships with people who care about us. I know that now, and I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've done for us. The house, the wedding planning help, just being patient with me while I figured things out. Derek pulled up with the car, ending our private conversation. But as we drove back to their rental house, I found myself cautiously optimistic about Madison's apparent emotional growth. That evening, I called Jennifer to update her on Derek's engagement news. That's wonderful, Mom. I can't wait to meet her properly at the wedding. Actually, I was thinking it might be nice to have a family dinner before then. Give you and Madison a chance to get to know each other better? I'd love that. And Mom, I have to say, you sound different lately. Happier. Do I? Yes. More like yourself again. I've been worried about you since Dad died, but lately you seem to be finding your way back to the person you used to be. Jennifer's observation was perceptive. I did feel more like my authentic self than I had in 2 years. The combination of reclaiming my social connections, establishing appropriate boundaries with Madison, and having a meaningful project like wedding planning had reignited parts of my personality that grief had temporarily extinguished. I think I'm finally ready to start living again instead of just surviving. I'm so glad, Mom. Dad wouldn't have wanted you to stay isolated forever. After hanging up with Jennifer, I sat in Harold's study thinking about the unexpected trajectory of recent events. Madison's criticism about my embarrassing appearance had been intended as an attack, but it had ultimately catalyzed positive changes that benefited everyone involved. Derek was thriving professionally and personally. Madison had gained independence and seemed to be developing greater emotional maturity. I had reclaimed my social standing and found new purpose in community involvement. Even the landlord-tenant relationship was working well, providing Derek and Madison with affordable housing while giving me rental income and maintaining appropriate boundaries. The upcoming wedding would be another test of our family dynamics, but I was optimistic about our ability to work together constructively. Madison's apology suggested she understood the mistakes she'd made, and her request for my help with wedding planning indicated genuine respect for my experience and judgment. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that Madison's original concern about family image had been resolved, but not in the way she'd expected. Instead of me changing to meet her standards, I'd raised the standards for the entire family by reclaiming my authentic social position and community connections. Now the question was whether we could all rise to meet those elevated standards together. 6 months later, I stood in the bridal suite at Riverside Country Club, fastening the clasp of my diamond necklace as Madison put the finishing touches on her wedding makeup. The transformation in our relationship had been as dramatic as my own personal evolution from grieving widow to community leader. "Anna, could you help me with the veil?" Madison asked, her voice trembling slightly with pre-wedding nerves. "Of course, sweetheart." As I secured the delicate lace veil to Madison's perfectly styled hair, I marveled at how far we'd both come. The wedding was everything Derek had dreamed of. Elegant, sophisticated, and attended by everyone who mattered in his professional and social circles. The guest list included partners from his law firm, members of my various charitable committees, and Madison's growing network of business clients. "You look absolutely radiant," I told her, and meant it. Madison had blossomed over the past months, her confidence growing as her business expanded and her relationship with Derek deepened. "Thank you for everything." Madison met my eyes in the mirror. "This wedding wouldn't have been possible without your help and guidance." It was true. Over the months of planning, I'd used my social connections to secure the perfect venue, introduce Madison to the best vendors, and ensure that every detail reflected well on our family. But more importantly, I'd watched Madison grow from an insecure young woman trying to tear others down into someone who was building something meaningful of her own. "You did the hard work, Madison. I just opened a few doors." A knock at the door interrupted us. "It's time," called Jennifer, who was serving as matron of honor. As we made our way to the ceremony space, I caught a glimpse of Derek waiting at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his face glowing with happiness. The partners from his firm were seated in the front rows alongside my new friends from the country club committees. It was exactly the kind of wedding that would enhance rather than embarrass anyone's professional reputation. The ceremony was beautiful, conducted in the club's garden pavilion with views of the golf course and carefully manicured grounds. As Derek and Madison exchanged vows, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. Madison's original criticism about my embarrassing clothes seemed like ancient history now. She'd been worried about family image, but her attempts to shame me had instead catalyzed a transformation that elevated all of us. Derek's career had flourished with the support of a sophisticated family network. Madison's business had grown as she gained confidence and authentic social connections, and I had reclaimed not just my wardrobe, but my rightful place in the community. During the reception, I found myself chatting with James Patterson and his wife Catherine at the head table. "Derek is fortunate to have such a supportive family," Catherine observed, watching Madison dance with her new husband. "You've clearly had a positive influence on both of them. They're wonderful young people. They just needed the right environment to flourish." James raised his glass. "To family. And to second chances." As the evening progressed, I was approached by Thomas Wagner from the Commercial Property Partnership. "Anna, I wanted to mention that Prestige Marketing Solutions has requested a 5-year lease renewal. Madison has built quite a successful operation in that space." I smiled, watching Madison network confidently with Derek's colleagues across the room. "She's a bright young woman with good business instincts. I'm not surprised she's found success." "Should we proceed with the lease renewal at current terms?" I considered the question. Madison still didn't know that I partially owned her office, building, and I'd never found a reason to tell her. Her business was thriving. She was paying rent reliably, and the property partnership was profitable for everyone involved. "Yes, let's offer her the 5-year renewal." Stable, long-term tenants are good for the property. Later, as the reception was winding down, Madison approached me at the bar where I was chatting with Eleanor Whitman about our upcoming hospital fundraiser. Anna, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Of course, dear. We stepped onto the club's terrace, where the evening air was cool and filled with the scent of jasmine from the gardens. I wanted to give you something, Madison said, pulling a small wrapped box from her purse. It's not much, but I saw it and thought of you. I opened the box to find a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm shaped like a key. The key represents new beginnings, Madison explained. You gave Derek and me the keys to our rental house, which gave us the space we needed to grow as a couple. But more than that, you gave me the key to understanding what real confidence looks like. I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, genuinely touched by the gesture. Madison, you didn't need to. Yes, I did. 6 months ago, I was so insecure and jealous that I tried to tear you down instead of building myself up. You could have retaliated, could have made our lives difficult in so many ways. Instead, you showed me what grace under pressure actually looks like. I thought about all the ways I could have made their lives difficult. The rental house, the commercial property lease, the social connections that could have been used to exclude rather than include. Madison was right that I'd had options for retaliation. Family doesn't retaliate, Madison. Family finds ways to lift each other up. That's what I mean. You redefined what family means to me. Growing up, my mother was always critical, always finding fault. I thought that's what families did, compete and criticize. You showed me a different way. As we rejoined the reception, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from what started as a painful conflict. Madison's criticism had forced me to examine whether I was living up to my own potential. Her attempt to shame me had actually inspired me to reclaim parts of myself that I'd lost to grief. In trying to diminish me, she'd inadvertently helped me discover that I was stronger, more resourceful, and more socially connected than either of us had realized. Derek found us as we returned to the ballroom. There are my 2 favorite women, he said, putting an arm around each of us. Thank you, both for making this the perfect wedding. Thank you for being worth celebrating, I replied, kissing his cheek. As the evening came to an end and guests began to leave, Derek and Madison prepared to depart for their honeymoon in Italy. Derek had surprised Madison with the trip, funded by his recent promotion and bonus from the Peterson case. When you get back, I told them as we said our goodbyes, I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? Derek asked. The rental house. I'd like to offer you the option to purchase it if you're interested. Owner financing, reasonable terms, no pressure. Derek and Madison exchanged glances of excitement and surprise. Mom, that's incredibly generous. It's practical. You're building a life together and home ownership is part of that foundation. Besides, I'd rather have family members as permanent neighbors than risk getting difficult tenants when your lease expires. It was partially true, though I also knew that offering them home ownership would cement our improved relationship and ensure their long-term stability in the community. As Derek and Madison drove away in their decorated car, I stood on the club's front steps with Jennifer, watching the taillights disappear into the night. That was a beautiful wedding, Mom. And I have to say, I'm impressed by how well you and Madison get along now. She's grown up a lot. We both have, I think. What changed? I considered the question as we walked to our cars. What had changed was my understanding of my own power and place in the world. Madison's criticism had been intended to make me smaller, but it had actually reminded me of how substantial I really was. I remembered who I am, I said finally. And once I knew that, everything else fell into place. Driving home alone that night, I passed the house where Derek and Madison would soon return as newlyweds and potential homeowners. The transformation from bitter conflict to family harmony had taken less than a year, but it felt like a lifetime of growth for all of us. Madison had been wrong about my clothes being embarrassing to the family, but she'd been right about one thing. Image and presentation did matter. The difference was that true confidence came from authentic accomplishment and genuine relationships, not from expensive clothes or social pretensions. I'd never needed to evict Madison or use any of the leverage I'd accumulated. In the end, the most powerful response to her criticism had been to prove, through my actions and choices, exactly what kind of woman she was dealing with. I was Anna Richardson. I owned property, influenced community decisions, and commanded respect in social circles Madison could never access on her own. But more importantly, I was generous enough to share those advantages with family members who treated me with the courtesy I deserved. Madison had learned that lesson well. And now, as Mrs. Derek Hartwell, she would have the opportunity to put it into practice for the rest of her life. The diamonds I'd worn to sign her eviction notice had never been necessary. Sometimes the most elegant victory is the one where everyone wins. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.